Hi, this is Desktop Publishing on a Budget using Google Slides, and I'm Mark Coiner. I'm a media teacher at Washington Middle School. So to give you a little bit of background, this presentation is not meant to be a substitute for desktop publishing applications such as InDesign or Quark. If you have students who can work with those applications and you have those applications, please use them. Those are excellent industry standard applications. Nor is it meant to be a substitute for better online apps or consumer level apps such as Lucid Press, Canva, Apple Pages, or MS Publisher. The idea came to me when I was doing my master's final poster project about 15 years ago. It hadn't dawned on me that PowerPoint slides could be resized to any dimension to create simple science fair type of poster boards. But since it was my master's in instructional technology, it made sense that my instructors expected me to do this. And I'm sure people are still using PowerPoint to this day in a similar manner. But as Google Slides has kind of taken over education and become kind of the go-to multimedia app, I figured it could be used in the same capacity with students. About 6 years ago, I was helping another teacher with his students' poster board presentations for a first Lego League competition. What made Google Slides more appealing was that team meetings weren't always enough time for students to work on the project. So its online and collaborative features made it really appealing. And here's an example of one that the students made. As I mentioned, Google Slides is used almost everywhere in education for teacher and student presentations, professional development collaboration, for online resources. I personally love it because teachers and students can work together and suggestions can be shared so progress can happen outside of the classroom. Now, here's my disclaimer. Since there is no text wrap or text flow, making traditional desktop publishing documents such as newsletters or brochures is not really ideal. But you can with a little manipulation. However, we all know that students aren't always the most patient when it comes to hacking an app to mimic a program. So go into this with an understanding that there are limitations. Again, if you have older, more capable students, Lucid Press, Canva will give you more options. But for younger students, Google Slides can be a powerful tool to show that combination of creativity and information delivery. For this presentation, I'm going to focus on poster-style projects incorporating the use of word art, image formatting, graphics, and online photo editing programs. So how to get started. Desktop publishing is intended for print or digital sharing. So when you're exporting a slide, you want to think about what's its intended use. If you're going to export a PDF, you're generally going to be using it for printing. If you're going to export it as a JPEG, you're probably going to use it in another digital file or online media. So to change its page setup, I'm going to show you this little video and let's take a look. So you're going to go to File and Page Setup, and you're going to drop down to Custom, and then you put in the dimensions that you want. I'm not showing this, but you also can change it to pixels. The first step with most projects is the teacher wants to walk the student through the background options. And there's three basic options. The first would be just adding a basic color to the background. But even within adding a color, you can use a color picker to get a more specific color. And even then, you can also add some transparency to even find a different hue of it. So let's take a look. So you go into background, you choose a color, and then what you need to do is you need to go back in, or at least this is how I found you need to do it. You go into your custom. You can adjust it with the color picker. But even once you've kind of found the color that you like with your color picker, you can go back in and add transparency. So it seems like this is a little involved, but um, it can allow your students to have kind of interesting backgrounds. So the next step is to add a gradient background. And there are default gradient backgrounds, but you can also customize them in really kind of fun and creative ways. So let's take a look. So you'd go to background and choose color, but a lot of people don't realize that there's gradients in the right tab. Set a standard gradient, and it looks fine. However, you can go back in to color, and then you can go to customize your gradient. And in customizing your gradient, you can change the color right away. You have two end stops that you can change either one of those colors. You can also add stops, and when the blue borders around it, you can change the color on each stop. You can add multiple stops. I'm not sure what the limitation is on it, but keep adding those colors. You can use the slider to adjust the radius in this situation, excuse me. You can also change the location or orientation of the radial pattern, and you can also change it to a linear pattern and change the angle on the linear pattern. And then you have a nice, interesting background, and that custom will stay. The last option is having an image inserted in the background, and there's a couple options, so let's take a look at that. So you're going to go to background and choose an image, and you can see there's a number of options. You can go to Google Drive, look for something that you've saved to Google Drive, and insert that in as your background. You can also go back into background, choose an image, and you can do a basic Google image search. This is quite a cool thing. Generally, it pulls back high resolution images. So pick a keyword search like I did, hit insert, and now you have a very interesting background. I'm going to show you how to add a couple more layers with transparency, and there's two types that I generally have the students do. The first one is a color where I'll go in and set some transparency to that, and it's made by going and getting a shape. So let's take a look. So you want to get a shape, and I tell the students just to use a rectangle. Drag it across your page. You can go and immediately go to custom and then get the color that you want and the hue. And then you want to use that transparency. So you've kind of created a filter, or what I would just say kind of a cover with transparency. Next, we're going to add an image as an overlay. And we'll also add some transparency to that. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so next I'm going to go into images and I'm going to search the web. And I'm going to check for a keyword of wood texture. And I'm going to go down. And I like the look of this distressed wood. I'm going to insert it. And one thing I tell the students to do is to zoom out if you can't see the whole slide. You can have them pull it proportionally, but it's okay also, in my opinion, to skew it a little bit. Now you want to go to your format options, and you want to go to adjustments and set a measure of transparency on that. And I'm going to zoom back in. Now it's in front, both layers are in front, so you can go to arrange and order and send to the back. And then even on that color layer, I'm going to go to arrange, order, and send to the back. And you kind of got a combination of interesting layers. So standard text doesn't have to just be simple. There's nearly 1,000 fonts available that Google can pull from. You can find them in your More fonts. And once you find a font that you like, you can add some other formatting to it, such as drop shadows, reflections, and you can even fill in the text box with a color or even a gradient. So let's take a look at that. Okay, I'm going to add a simple text box, and I'll just call it simple text. I'm going to center it. Now I'm going to make sure that it's selected, change font color, and I'm going to look for more fonts. You can see I've added fonts in the past, but now I'm going to look for more. Slides will generate a whole list of fonts, and it will keep adding fonts as you go. So just encourage the kids to not just pick the first choices. And when you find something that's interesting, click on it. It'll be added as a favorite of yours, and I'm going to change my font style. Once I've selected my font, I can go to Format Options, and if I want to, I can add a drop shadow, and the drop shadow can also have a different color if you want. You can set its transparency, its angle, its distance, its blur. You can do a number of things, but I think that distance is a little too much. You can also set a reflection, and I don't think that this was available up until recently. And then you can adjust the distance, and you can adjust the size of the reflection. Next, if you want, you can fill the text box. If you do that, the reflection and the shadow go to the shape. And but you can also use a gradient fill instead. And like before, you can go to a custom gradient and add some stops and have an interesting text box. So with word art, I have been constantly surprised at how few students are aware of this. With word art, just as you've seen with backgrounds and even with the text fill I just showed you, you can customize the color, add transparency to that color. You can also fill text with gradient, create custom gradients. You can add a border, adjust the weight on the border, and then you can add those format options of drop shadow and reflection. So let's take a look. To add word art, go to Insert, Word Art. I'm going to type in word art, and then I'm going to hit Enter or Return. If you made a mistake or you want to modify what you've written, you can just double click to get back in here, and I'll just put it as one word. Now I can change the font. Sometimes when you change a font, especially a wider font, you might need to resize it. You can have the kids pull it from a corner so it proportionally resizes, but it is word art, so you can stretch it out, you can elongate it, however you want to make it look interesting to you. Next, I'm going to go to Fill, and you can do your color changes, but you can also go to Gradients. If you have some gradients that you've used already in this slide, gradients don't save across different slides, not meaning slides within the presentation, but across other presentations. But if you have a gradient, you can reuse that or make a new gradient. A lot of students don't think to change the border, and changing the weight of the border sometimes makes it pop a little more. If your format options are open from a previous use, great. If not, and it's closed, format options becomes available whenever the word art is selected. Click on Format Options. You can add that drop shadow. You can add that reflection, and then do the adjustments that are available. Sometimes students don't think to look with the little carrots or arrowheads. So encourage them to open these up to make the adjustments. A text graphic is just as it sounds. It is a graphic that is of some formatted text. And there are a lot of really cool text graphic generators online that you can find really easily by simply putting that in your search. My favorites, my go-tos are Cool Text, Flaming Text, and one that I became familiar with a couple of years ago, Font Meme, that will do text graphics of famous logos, or at least similar to the famous logo. You can find the Friends text graphic on Font Meme. It's really kind of cool. So they're really easy to customize. And the cool thing about it is that when you're done, you can either copy and paste it into your document, you can save it to your drive or to your computer, or you can even drag and drop it. And let's go take a look at some of them. So I'm going to go to cooltext.com. And in here, you'll have a variety of preset styles, but every style is customizable, and I encourage you to check out more styles. But I'm just going to use this Keen style. And so you're going to type in what you want for your title, and I'm just going to put in my title. I encourage students to immediately up the size because the larger your graphic, the better quality it will be if you need to resize it. And don't worry, this will happen a lot of times where it'll say rendered image split, but it will be fine. You can change your font right here, and there's tons of fonts to search for. I'll go to Fancy, and I'll just pick this fancy style right here. And I'm going to now, again, you'll see that it'll render shortly. I'm going to go to my logo, and I'm going to use this gradient. Finally, it shows you a rendering, but trust me, it's been a recent problem, but I think it's fine. When you choose this gradient, you can go and pick one of their presets. And this does that. It will pop it back to your text, so you just have to go back to your logo. And you can also make it a horizontal gradient. And as you can see, sometimes, again, it takes a while for it to re-render. If you don't want either one of these styles, you can go back to that two-color gradient, which I kind of skipped. You can also add a border. I'll do yellow or a yellowish. And I can add some weight to it. Oops. Now I'm going to move over to my shadow. I'll give it a light blur shadow. And then your offset is your distance, so you can set it off a little bit, and I apologize, but this is what Cool Text will do, and maybe this is a good experience of seeing that. Don't freak out. It will kind of re-render it every couple times. Okay, if you get it the way you like, you can go to Create Logo, and you can download it. That will download to the student's Chromebook. It'll download to my computer. If you want to keep this style and just kind of change it, you can just go back to Edit, and you can go back and change what you want to say. So I'll say my new text. And I'm going to go to Create Logo because I like all the other settings on it. Now, when I was talking earlier, I said that you can copy and paste it. So you can. So I can copy it. I right-click and copy. And I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to right-click and paste. I also can click on it and drag it towards the tab. And when I get that arrow and the plus sign, I can drop it in also. So as I mentioned before, these graphics can be formatted, and you can go and add maybe not another drop shadow unless you really want to, but maybe you can change it to, you know, a secondary drop shadow with a little bit of distance, just to kind of add an effect. You can also add a reflection. With the reflection, you might want to set the size larger and maybe not as much distance. And I'll move this other one off to the side. In fact, we don't even need that second one. Another cool thing that you can do with this is, I'll take off the reflection for a moment. Under adjustments, you can add a measure of transparency. You can create more brightness. You can just do some modifications if you want. There's some really artistic students who like to play around with stuff like this. but I am going to try to set that back to how it is, or just leave it at that. You can even go in and recolor and find some weird recoloring that presets that Google will set to it, but maybe that's defeating the purpose of using the text graphic generator. But those are just some other formatting options that you can give to this text graphic and think about in the future for when I show you some graphics. When using Google Slides, I have my students generally search for images either within slides and add the word transparency or PNG to their search, or I ask them to go to a new tab and do an image search, and then use some of the tool settings to adjust for size, color, type, and then I have them either save it to their drive and then insert it into their slide, or do the drag and drop that I showed you with cool text. So let's take a look at some of the variants that we can find. So when searching for images, you want to go to the image icon and search. You can also go into insert image and search, but I find this easier. If anybody knows me, they know I'm obsessed with pugs, but you want to throw in the word transparent or transparent background, and you'll find a combination of graphics and images that someone has posted that they had used a photo editor to take the background out. And usually it comes back with that transparent background. Sometimes it'll say it's transparent and it doesn't come back that way. Another option would be to do an image search, and maybe you're going to do it on your favorite sports team. And so I might do like the Mariners and throw in logo, sometimes helps, but add in PNG, getting the students to know that terminology can really help. And click on a graphic and hit insert. And there you go, you've got both images that have transparent backgrounds. As I mentioned before, you can use your formatting options to add your drop shadows and your reflections. Even on an image graphic, you can do that too. Another option is to open a new tab, and I encourage students to click on images and search for cars in this case, and it's going to pull back a lot of really interesting looking cars, but you want them to go to tools and you want to set the color to transparent. And then this is going to pull back those images that someone took into a photo editor like Photoshop and remove the background. So you want to click on the image and see whether it has that telltale checkerboard background, and that will tell you that it's a PNG. And if that's the case, you right click and you can save the image to your computer, or you can do that same thing that we did with the text graphic, drag and then drop it into your Google slide. Another consideration would be, I'll go to a new image search and I'm going to search, in this case, I'm going to search for a ballerina. And I'm going to go to my tools and I'm going to set my color to transparent. But I'm also going to go to type because maybe I just want only clip art. And so I find an image like this. And again, I'm going to look for whether it has a transparent background or not. This one doesn't. So it says it's a PNG, but it isn't. So I'll try this one. And this one does have that transparent background. And so again, you can right click and save the image, or you can drag, let me try that again, drag and drop it into your slide. One last thing to consider is that on a car like this, I didn't pay attention to how big it was. And so sometimes a student will try to make it really big and it'll start to get kind of blurry. So one last thing that you can talk to them about is when I go back into here, if I look at it, it's got a really small pixel count. So I can go and set my size to large and then keep my settings, my transparent background, and find a similar image I'll go with this car. Again, I'm looking for that transparent background, but you can see I have a high pixel count. And I'm going to drag and drop this one in. And now I have a nice car with a transparent background, a little bit of a shadow for effect, but that's perfectly fine. One thing I neglected to add was that when I downloaded that image, and even when I downloaded graphics in the past, if you save them to your Chromebook or to your computer, you can either upload it to your Google Slide, or you can transfer it or import it from your drive. So for me, I'm on a Mac. I'm going to upload it from my computer. And here was that first car that I had. And so that's just another way. So students tend to like to drag and drop, but if they need the image for other projects, save it to their drive and then transfer it to their Google Slide. Okay, there are some minor decorations that you can do to an image that doesn't have a transparent background. You can go to Format and Borders and Lines, and you can have a border color, and you can get that same setting right here. You can also get the weight right here, or you could set the weight in your Borders and Lines weight. You can go to a border type if you want to have multiple lines, can add a nice effect to it. You can also go to your decorations, and this works, but not always. So I'm not a huge fan of it, but it's nice when you can set, kind of a rounded edge. And then you can always go back to your format options and use drop shadows and do adjustments. Another option for students who are creative is they could go to image search and search for a picture frame, set your tools to transparent, find something that they like, drag and drop it into here. And you can use it as an overlay. You can resize it. You can also distort it a little bit, and it'll look actually perfectly fine. So I'm going to just kind of make it smaller and just get it about the same size. And now all you need to do is the student, if they swipe across both, they can then group it. So now they can move it around together, and you've created your own little picture frame. And then the whole graphic can still have a drop shadow or even a reflection. So as I said before, Google Slides is not a really expansive program, but there are some things that you can do to add a little to your posters. So I'm going to go to shapes, and most of the shapes are pretty basic, but you can fill them with colors, gradients, do borders. Some of the shapes have these like little, and I'll zoom in, these little rhombi, I should say, or diamonds, and that allows you to adjust the shape. You can also use callouts for fun, and with the callout, you generally have that same diamond that you can adjust so that it's near the character. And then you can type inside and say, I thought I would be done by now. And then if you just click off and then click back on the shape itself, you can do some what I call universal formatting, where you can resize it, get another font, change the color. You can even go into your alignment, center it, and then I'm always a big fan of centering it vertically, so that if you do resize this, it stays centered in the shape. With doing desktop publishing projects, sometimes having some photo editing skills is not a bad thing. And there are two really good online apps, photop.com and pixlr.com. They're both free, and they have very similar features to Photoshop. Photop, I found, really works well with Google Drive. And so if you have an image saved to Google Drive, if you connect Photop to your drive, you can bring it into Photop, do some basic corrections, and then save it, and it'll save directly to Google Drive. I use it primarily for projects where I'm having the kids remove the background from an image, usually themselves or a famous person when they're putting it into an informational quote poster. But if you have more experience with photo editing, I would really recommend that you check these two out. And here's just a really quick look at what Photop looks like. You've got your lasso tools, you've got your magic wand, and you've got a variety of other tools. You can use your gradient tool to make nice, cool backgrounds. Um, it does have text features where you can add special effects and create beveled text. But for me, I find that using text graphic generators are better. But I do like to use Photop. So here's Pixlr, and it looks very similar. Here you have your lasso tools, but your different options are up here. And you can see that it's got many of the same tools that I just showed you with Photop, and also that you would find in Photoshop. So I recommend that you check it out. When exporting your slide to different formats, you'll go to File and Download. And for a PDF, I think about projects that I want to print because they're scalable. I can print beyond its set dimensions. I can go many times, 2 to 3 times larger without losing resolution. Whereas with a JPEG, whatever dimensions you set at, if you go too much beyond those dimensions while printing, it can pixelate. And so that's why I do encourage you to, again, set the size large at the beginning and use images that have good resolution. So I'm going to download each one of these and we'll take a look. With your PDF, what happens is it's going to download all of the slides. So I'll show you an example of downloading just a single PDF, which is what you would normally do with a poster. With a JPEG, it will just only look at the current slide. Same with the PNG. So here is the JPEG. And as you can see, when I start to scale it up, it will start to pixelate. And I'll zoom in even a little more and you'll see that pixelation. So this is not preferred for printing, but if you keep it at its natural dimensions, it should look just fine in another document or online. Whereas if I download it as a PDF, you can see as I scale it up, it keeps its resolution pretty strong beyond a number of times scaling it. And so that's why I prefer PDFs for printing and JPEGs for embedding or including in other file types. For the last part of this presentation, I just want to go over some of the projects that I've done with my students using Google Slides. You can see in the bottom left, we do name signs where the students incorporate graphics, text graphics from text graphic generators to use some adjectives about themselves, and using simple word art as their kind of focal point of their name. We use the concept of adding layers so that you can kind of see that it's not just one individual background, but multiple backgrounds. We have a little fun and we do memes, and this is where the students will take a picture of themselves, usually on their Chromebook, and take it into Photop, cut out the background, and then add it to their Google slide. It's funny because I'll tell them to be inspired by, not too mean memes online, but I think a lot of them are pretty original and inventive. So I usually enjoy seeing what they produce. Uh, to kind of carry on from the meme, we do inspirational quote posters where the students will just try to improve on their skill of cutting out backgrounds by finding a famous person's high resolution image and cutting out the background, and then being creative with text and sizing and backgrounds to make a inspirational quote poster. Um, I really like to do infographic posters. I think that infographic posters are a great way to present material in a really quick and interesting way. So we've done that in Google Slides. And the cool thing is that students can collaborate. So it doesn't have to be a singular project. Usually, when we've been in school, even though they're sitting right next to each other, I'll have them do it just on one Google slide. And as I said before, I've helped students do robotics posters, but you can do science fair posters with Google Slides. And then the last example is a kindness poster. And it actually wasn't made in Google Slides, but I plan to do that this year. And all the elements that went into making this poster that you can see in the bottom right, you can do in Google Slides. And I'll show you some more examples in just a moment. Okay, so I'm going to take you through just a couple of the name signs that students make. And we actually make a enlarged version of this for all of our teachers at school. We have these big window transoms over our doors, and so we've had students work as designer clients and work back and forth with the teachers on making name signs for them. And so it's kind of a cool project. So with this student, you can see that they actually put an overlay over all of their graphics, and I'll show that to you. As I pull that away, you can see the other layers below and the graphics in their native color. And here's even another background. And then she just had a simple gradient background. Each image has, looks like she's formatted it with a slight shadow. And so it's just kind of a fun way for students to show graphically what their interests are and a little bit of their personality with the text graphics. Here's another one. This by a student, and actually this is kind of funny. He used these GIFs in here, but when you make a PDF of it, it will just take a snapshot of the GIF. He has two layers. You can see that first layer and the second layer. You can see he actually has a pretty interesting background that's quite different than his two layers. He originally had his last name spelled out with individual letters. As you can see, he used cool text to make his name, but for FERPA reasons, I've only just put in his last name initial. So the space was kind of more filled with the individual letters of his name. And he did not have that overlay like the previous one over all the graphics, so you can see they're a little more vibrant. But just a playful way of expressing himself. One thing that I ask students to do is make sure to go into presentation mode. And this gives you a preview of what it will look like in a PDF so that you can see that your layers are not off so that it's covering the whole slide. Sometimes students don't realize that as they are adding layers, that they can't see the original background. Okay, so here's a collection of some of my favorites from this year, and these were all done in distance learning using Google Slides. This student, as you can see, she used an interesting background that she found online, and I like how she lined up not only her text but also her elbow. And then she's got like a light gradient background. Her text is word art, but she's using a really interesting font, in my opinion. And she added a gradient fill and a light blur background with a little bit of distance. This is just a graphic she found online. And what I like about this is, looks like it's a line. a scribble that she drew and then used a dashed line. That's what appears to be the case. And then she added color to give it some variety. And I kind of like it. It seems like it's kind of balanced, like it's this and this color and this color. I'm not much of a designer, but I think it looks really cool. I'll show you another one. This one is actually one of my favorites, and you can see that he had a little fun where he actually made some different versions of it. In this one, he used kind of that superhero background, but on the original one, he just used just a gradient background, so there's not any extra layers. But each one of these lines of text are from Cool Text, and he brought them in as graphics. This is an actual picture of him holding the Lysol, having fun with that. These are small graphics online. And then this kind of water image is just an image overlay that he found probably online. And to me, it's just really inventive. And I love the resizing of the Corona graphics to kind of give you some depth. This is, to me, way beyond what I would expect most students be able to do. I thought it was really inventive. And just again, to show you when you go to File and Download as a JPEG, takes a little bit, but once it's finished, I click on it, and there you go, there's your JPEG. So once the students have done their meme project and they've gotten a little bit of experience taking an image into Photop and cutting out their background, I asked them to then make an inspirational quote poster based on someone who already inspires them, or the reverse, look at a list of quotes, famous quotes, and then find an image of that person, a high resolution image, because you're still bringing it into a large document, so you don't want it to pixelate as you increase its size. And then be creative with backgrounds and layers and your text. And so in looking at this one, you can see that she used an overlay that's got a texture. And as I pull it over to the side, you can see that that's actually a picture of the Dunder Mifflin building from the office. And what I think is really cool is that she also put a measure of transparency on the Dwight character, so you can kind of see the building behind. She used word art, but she had fun with this by resizing it using multiple different fonts. You can see that this is word art with a really light border around it. And it's just the way she laid it out. This student, in my opinion, obviously has a really, really good design eye. And as I've said before, I'm more an appreciator of other people's talent than myself being able to create something this inventive, in my opinion. I think it was a lot of fun. Let me show you another one. And with this project, I don't ask them to necessarily put any extra layers. So I'm fine with a basic gradient. Some people do, some people go with just a basic background. What I like about this one is that the student used just normal text, but they rotated the text using the little rotation bar and circle, brought in some cool text for emphasis, putting in that cool text in a much larger resized size allows you to really see what she feels the quote is trying to emphasize. And I just thought this was really good. And you can see up close, it's not a perfect cutout. It's really hard to do hair. But when you export it again as a JPEG, when it's all fused together, it looks quite good. For infographic posters, the students will start with a really large file size. And so I'm going to take you in to let you see. So under page setup, I have them set it up quite large. And this is really based on our large format printer. I can rotate this so that it can be the width of the paper, which is 44 inches. So these are not quite random numbers, but that's why I set it at that size. You can set it at whatever size you plan to print it as. This was a collaborative project amongst 3 students. They're all sitting near each other, so they were talking back and forth, but they were all on it at the same time. And as you can see, this is just regular text, but they made some really cool color variations on it, interesting background, and then bringing in the graphics and just trying to kind of space it out so that it draws the viewer's eyes to the information. I'll show you another couple. This one was done by 2 boys, and one of them was really into basketball and one of them was really into baseball, and so they thought they'd make an infographic poster trying to compare the pros and cons of each sport. I like how they used resizing, and sometimes they would use just a separate text box and then just align the text next to it. They did a really simple little graph that they linked from Google Sheets, and that's not too hard to do. And it's just, I like just the layout, the color to kind of contrast the sports. It's just a real interesting way to present their ideas. This is another collaborative project, and I like how the students kind of use kind of modern media graphics and then try to identify that the 1 of 4, as the sentence says, using a clock to try to give you a sense about how often someone is bullied, the individual graphics, and again identifying the 1 of 5 people. So another way to kind of present it, nice kind of blending colors. And I think this was, I think actually this background was an image that they found, excuse me, that had these bands of color. Here, this project was done by a student all by herself in 7th grade, and as you may guess, she was taking Washington State history, and so she wanted to relate it to what she was currently studying. And I hope she showed this to her teacher. I think she might have, and I would hope that she got credit for it. But I like how it's very iconically, graphically laid out, and getting in all those facts that students learn in Washington State history. So I thought this was a really neat design. These samples were done when we were still in school using InDesign, but I hope from my presentation you'll see that they can easily be done in Google Slides. With the constraints of distance learning, I haven't always been able to get to this project, or actually I haven't been able to get to this project, but my hope is this semester with a semester-long class, I can get to it. So let's just take a look at some samples, and you'll see that it's just how they bring in images and resize text and lay it out. And I'm just going to kind of scroll through these and show you some of the ones that I think can easily be done in Google Slides. These are just graphics that the student found online, though they could probably find a simple graphic and find these eyes and eyebrows, or even draw some of these text with a simple shadow. Again, just different fonts, different sizing, bringing in graphics, nice interesting background. I think it's just up to the students. Once they see that it's just basic text, graphics, background, that combination, they can do pretty much any of these projects in Google Slides. This one I thought was really, really cool. I liked this example. The student had shown me that they'd found a site where you could actually translate kindness into all these different languages. And so I thought this was really an inventive way of showing that. And nice graphical look of the earth. This is just finding a simple silhouette of a tree and putting in some grass graphic, and then just the text it just adds the leaves. I thought that was, again, really inventive. Thank you for joining me in my presentation. Below is my contact information if you'd like to find out more about my program.